Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to be rising in this House in this final week of the 42nd Parliament on behalf of the constituents of Cowichan, Malahat, Langford to speak to the Conservatives' final Opposition Day motion, which reads as follows: that, given the carbon tax will not reduce emissions at its current rate and is already making life more expensive for Canadians, the House call on the government to repeal the carbon tax and replace it with a real environment plan. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have some problems with the way this motion is worded, and I'll go over them. So, number one, the motion is asking us to basically take a major step of repealing a carbon tax and then putting our faith in a so-called real environment plan. With respect to my Conservative colleagues, if they had wanted us to maybe put a bit more substantive thought into this motion, perhaps they could have timed the release of their environment plan for today, so that instead of waiting until tomorrow when our debate on this motion will be well and truly finished, we would actually have something substantive to compare a carbon tax to, and to see if it's actually going to achieve a goal of reducing Canada's emissions. So that's my first main criticism, is if you are going to make the House debate a motion where you're going to repeal something that's already in existence and replace it with something else, it would be nice to actually know what that something else is. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is I think a large amount of the debate on the carbon tax has to do with the cost, the price. There's a few things I would like to say to address that. So first of all, I think that, with respect to my Conservative colleagues, I think they're having a fairly visceral reaction to a carbon tax because it seems to be a policy that was introduced by a Liberal government. And that's a problem. There seems to be sometimes a knee-jerk reaction from the official opposition to anything that the Liberals do. But we want to examine these policies for their merits to see if they're actually going to do things. And the other thing, too, is I think the basic premise of the argument over the costs of the carbon tax are based on an assumption that we can fight climate change without incurring costs. Any politician who tells you that we can address this problem without cost to ourselves, to the government, to society as a whole, I'm sorry, but they are simply not being truthful to you. This is going to require a major effort on all parts, on all fronts. And furthermore, when we're looking at the proposed costs of a carbon tax, we know, at $20 a ton, it's going to equal 4 cents per litre. By the time it goes up to $50 a ton, which I believe in 3 years, it will cost up to 11 cents per litre. So to put that into perspective, Mr. Speaker, that means in 3 years you will be adding about $7 in cost to a fill-up of your tank. $7. That's what we're arguing over, and that's not even in effect now. That's in 3 years' time. The reason why I want to underline the cost part of it is this. While we're quibbling about the costs of a carbon tax now, which most experts around the world acknowledge is far too low to have any meaningful action, I want to put that in the context of just what the costs of unmitigated climate change are going to be and how those are going to affect future tax revenues. I mean, if we think that the climate change now is costly, just look what the costs will be when we hit 2 degrees Celsius of warming, 3 degrees Celsius, 4 degrees Celsius. I mean, we're already seeing the effects. My home province of British Columbia, our budget for forest firefighting is going to be completely blown out of the water. That is the long-term trend. In my own community of Cowichan, Malahat, Langford, I live in a rainforest, and in March we got 30% of our normal rainfall. Like the lakes and the rivers were at 30% of where they should have been. And what that is actually going to require in future years is a hefty dose of infrastructure money to actually build a new weir so we can hold more lake supply back to make sure that the river flows at an adequate rate. These have very real costs. This is not even speaking about the extension of the droughts we're going to have in many different parts of Canada, the flooding, the mitigation and adaptation measures we're going to have to employ. I mean, some of the most expensive real estate in the country is located in Vancouver, which is a floodplain. And before I continue, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted you to be sure that I am splitting my time with the honourable member for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke. But if you look at where the Vancouver International Airport is located, you know, that's the floodplain of the Fraser River. So what happens in future years when we have a flooding Fraser River meeting increased sea levels and we have to suddenly build all of that dike infrastructure to keep the waters at bay? This is going to be a pattern that repeats itself again and again and again. And so I just really want to underline that fact that, you know, while we're quibbling of the costs in the present day, we're actually not doing justice to the issue for future generations and future parliaments and the costs that those governments are going to have to deal with. Furthermore, you know, this effort that we are going to have to mount to properly address climate change is going to have to be on the scale of what our country did to fight the Great Depression and World War II. And let's use World War II as an example because, you know, I keep on hearing the argument that, you know, Canada's efforts aren't really going to amount to much. It has to be sort of a worldwide solution. Well, yes, there is some truth to that. But the fact of the matter is that, Mr. Speaker, that in World War II, yes, our relative contributions to the wartime effort were quite small vis-a-vis other countries. But did Canada shirk its duties? Did we say that, well, by ourselves, we're not going to win the war, so we may as well, you know, pull back our effort? No, we did not. We mobilized the wartime economy. We put people to work. We got our factories up and running. We increased our armed forces, and we sent people off to make sure that the effort was won. We did not shirk from our duties, and that is precisely the type of mobilization that we as a country are going to need to employ to properly address this problem. And so I want to use that as a historical context. We as a country have been able to punch above our weight, and we have the ability to do so again. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is I want to touch on Trans Mountain and the climate emergency motion that was debated yesterday. So we just received news that the Liberal government has approved the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, and that absolutely undercuts anything they said yesterday with regard to their support for a climate emergency, because climate leaders do not build pipelines. The expansion of that pipeline means that the proponents, namely the government of Canada, because it owns the pipeline, are planning for it to be in operation for another 10, 20, 30 years. So, Mr. Speaker, does that mean by the year 2050, with all of the evidence of climate change, we still want to be exporting diluted bitumen at 3 times the amount we currently are? Is that where we really want to invest our billions of dollars? No, we do not want to do that. Think of what we could be kickstarting in the renewable energy economy of the future with that kind of money if we made those kind of investments, and getting rid of the oil and gas subsidies that we shamefully still continue to pay out year after year. This government can say all the right words, but when you look at the details, it is sadly lacking. I'm very proud of the work that my party has done over the years. If you go back to 2006 when Jack Layton brought in his Climate Change Accountability Act, we had Megan Leslie in 2009 talking about a Green New Deal. And of course, the member for Edmonton Strathcona, who's been an environmental lawyer for decades, has brought in a bill to enshrine environmental rights into law. This is the legacy of our party. We are a party that has proposed an oil and gas ombudsman to look at the price of gas at the pump so that consumers can actually know when oil and gas companies are gouging them. These price fluctuations are not the result of a carbon tax, they're the result of oil companies controlling the supply from the refinery to the pump, and they are making billions of dollars of profit off our backs. If we had an ombudsperson, we could have Canadian consumers looking up those prices and getting the certainty that they deserve. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'll just end on this. I'm extremely proud of the proposal that we have put forward in our Power to Change document, because we are not going to tackle this problem with a carbon tax alone. It's going to make a multifaceted effort where we retrofit homes, where we help that transition for people who are employed in oil and gas, get those skills so they can transfer to the new renewable energy economy of the future. But it is going to take a Herculean effort where everyone works together, puts aside partisanship, and realizes that this problem is far above us all, and we all need to work together to properly address it. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires?